Welcome to the MultiCultural Mindset broadcast. Your host is Dr. LaVerne Collins, a licensed professional counselor, award-winning trainer, and keynote speaker. Dr. Collins is the author of Overlooked: Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues in Black American Life. Dr. Collins has also been a featured monthly columnist in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine with her Honoring Diversity column. Now, here's Dr. Collins.
And hello. Welcome back to another episode of the MultiCultural Mindset. We are talking this week for the second week in a row on Crimmigration and immigrant mental health. And my guest is Dr. George James Ramos. He is a licensed mental health counselor and an expert in immigration-related psychological evaluations. He is the founder of the New York City Immigrations Evaluations. And in that role, he has provided hundreds of clinical assessments for visas and cancellation of removal cases, etc. He is a scholar. He teaches at the university level, currently teaching at NYU and Mercy University. So, Dr. Ramos, thank you for joining us again. You were with us last week when we talked about just setting the context and understanding what's happening with immigration. You're back this week so we can talk about mental health of immigrant populations more specifically. I so appreciate your time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you also.
I want to dive right in. Available data from the late 2024, early 2025 around immigrant mental health statistics are still emerging. We don't have a full picture yet. It's just too soon. But the earliest data, the data that we have available right now indicates that there is a high prevalence of mental health challenges among immigrants, particularly for refugee claimants, undocumented migrants, and those who are exposed to restrictive immigration policies. We're finding PSD, where we're hearing about depression, anxiety disorders being significant concerns. You, as I said last week, you got your boots on the ground, and I'd like to hear from you about your perspective. What are you seeing as you're doing evaluations? Are those statements at all inflamed, or are they minimized?
Yeah, so I think based on the information that you've stated, it's spot on. We're starting to see, particularly with much more of the enforcement being more televised and the enforcement being stepped up. We're starting to see people particularly have a lot of anxiety and then sometimes depressive symptoms as well as hopelessness as well. We see sort of categories surround all of the groups that are subject to potentially what you would call being detained by ICE, it seems. I think there's essentially two fears that people have that impact their mental health. One of them is that they'll be forced to leave the United States, leave their families behind, their job, their career, the lives that they've created, and go back to places oftentimes that can be dangerous or that they haven't lived in a long time. But then the other more immediate fear might be being detained by ICE, moved to another location, not having contact, and maybe most scary for people is not having access to their due process.
Not having access to due process. Yeah. Just say a word about that. We'll come back to mental health, but if that's a big fear, that's part of the trauma. Speak about that, please.
Yeah, so you may have seen recently many of the agents who are working, I guess what you would known as ICE, the immigration enforcement, often detaining people and arresting them. And while these arrests may be legally and they may be lawful, there's an aspect of this that's been very traumatic for some of my clients, which is many of the officers are having face coverings. And some of those face coverings are going like down almost from the eyelid down to the face. Now, I think there's been some instances that people have been threatened, so the officers are protecting their identity. I think what it can do, though, is it can be very scary. If someone's coming up to you in the street and they're masked and they're armed, sometimes they're wearing vests that say police, but that when you're kind of in this fight or flight syndrome, you may not look to read that. You think there's a person that's with a mask that's coming at me with a gun. Some of that even relates to the trauma of why the person left their country of origin. So we're starting to see a lot of people really concerned about if I leave my house today, there may be a group of masked men that are armed that may come to try to detain me. And we've also seen that there have been some impersonators of ICE who've been sort of taking advantage of this new uniform
Oh,
in order to sort of be like vigilantes to a degree. So the question is, all right, I may get detained. Are these even going to be real people? These people are heavily armed. What does this mean for me? It's creating a lot of fear. And I think what ends up happening is when you see clients that have fear to this degree, often what you might think is, all right, there may be something here in their mind that's exaggerating it, but you have to contextualize it. In this particular case, these are clients that really are afraid for their life and their safety and for their process of justice every day. It takes a
mm,
toll, and clinicians need to be really aware of that, that they're not making this up, they're not overreacting. It's just their reality, has been different since January.
yeah, my goodness. It angers me that people would even go out there and present and misrepresent, the whole imposter thing that you just described. That angers me to no end. I'm so sorry to hear that that is happening. Um, let's talk about risk factors and protective factors against mental health, the more severe mental health challenges that can come along. Are there any protective factors? We know that there are lots of risk factors, but talk about some of those. And are
Yeah.
there any protective factors?
So I think some of the protective factors that people can have is based on their socioeconomics. Something you may have people here that are in the U.S. that are undocumented that actually are quite wealthy. You may have someone that comes from another country. They may have overstayed their visa, but they have access to resources. One of the common misconceptions
Okay.
is that someone's undocumented, they're working on some sort of farm or some sort of hard manual labor job, and they're not making much money. That does happen. It is common, but it's not for everyone. And there are people that have access to
Hmm.
resources. They have
Hmm.
education for the country to which they come. They have ability to earn income. So we see there
Hmm.
can be some socio-economic protective factors.
Hmm.
We also see people who are rooted in their faith can see that as a protective factor as well. Although I have worked with some people that are part of congregations that they've had to leave because the leadership in the congregation has been more oriented towards being anti-immigrants, kind of the words coming to my mind. It can be really difficult to worship, and it can be difficult to worship in a church where the pastor or the deacons are actively talking about deporting you and people like you and maybe family members. So that can be a protective factor in the event that the church and the person who's there are sort of aligned, whether that's politically,
Mm.
whether that makes sense, what their policy is. So those are probably two of the biggest factors. Another factor can be if the immigrant party has family here, whether it's whether it's their mother, father, children, it can be sort of used as a way to inspire them to continue to work towards resolving this, as scary as it can be.
Okay. So there's the hope of building a legacy that can be a protective factor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
gotcha.
and
Okay.
also the reflex of providing for your family.
Hmm. Okay. Protective factors. Now, historically, uh, many immigrant communities and members of immigrant populations have been a little resistant, understandably so, to utilizing mental health services. Um, and we would speak of their fear as a barrier to care, and I'm not buying into that. Um, the fear is a protective fear, not a avoidant fear per se, in the sense of clinically, just being resistant or avoidant. But can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with regard to access? Does this particular crisis draw people perhaps into counseling more, or does this particular crisis that we are in right now cause people to be even more afraid, even of, say, private practice counselors or behavioral health care?
Yeah. So there's a few barriers you have to talk about, which is the first one is mental health care can be expensive, particularly if you don't have insurance. Many people who are undocumented may not have insurance. They may not qualify for government insurance. And if they didn't before, after some of the new legislation that we see that is passing regarding the budget, it certainly won't have it. So that's a barrier. But I think also
Hmm.
people are really, really concerned right now about their status, and they want to make sure they're talking to someone safe. So sometimes
Hmm.
people call me and they'll call me from different numbers, and they want to know who is going to get access to the report. Who am I speaking to? Am I someone they can
Hmm.
trust? I think a part of
Mm-hmm.
it, you know, some populations may be less inclined to use mental health services. We see that by the genders as well. But then another part of it is, can I trust you? If I call Dr. Collins and I give you the sensitive information and I give you my address where I'm living, are you going to call ICE on me? Or is ICE going to have access to your information? Or is there going to be someone else that's going to pop up? Am I going to, I don't want to expose myself. And even though you may be an advocate and an ally, these are real questions that people have to ask themselves. Um, and again,
They
for
don't know.
a clinician that's not contextualized, it may seem like this person's paranoid, they're just protecting themselves.
Exactly, exactly. They don't know where the lines are drawn, and sometimes it's hard for us to know where the lines are drawn, especially with where we're going, with what we might be required to share eventually. I mean, fortunately, that's not the case right now, and I don't think that we're close to that. At least I certainly hope not. I don't think we're close to that, but I understand how someone who doesn't who's not really familiar with systems in the United States, which is one of the major hurdles that you have to manage when you first arrive in the USA. All these systems, we have so many branches of government and education and health and labor and child and family services and immigrant. I mean, so many branches of government. People don't know where the lines are drawn. And even if you're in private practice, you may be seen as part of the government because of your perceived authority. So that's important. And can counselors um, do anything? Can they post anything on their websites? Can they make a statement about being ally or immigrant friendly? Is that even a good idea?
Yeah. On their web, so I'm not sure if on their websites is going to be useful. Here's why I think maybe posting something like that on the website isn't particularly a good idea. It seems like right now, um, there's some challenges. There was a lawyer actually, I think in Maryland, his office was raided as an immigration lawyer. I think that I expect that maybe there's going to be some scrutiny, if not,
Mm,
yeah, maybe some scrutiny from the federal government surrounding people that do work with these particular populations. I'm not
mhm.
sure if you want to outline yourself like that or not. But what I do think is probably
Yeah,
more useful, less efficient, but more useful, is when we talk to clients off the bat, tell them whatever we talk about is safe, it's protected. These are the laws that protect it as of today. I want to make sure you are aware of that. Um, and let clients know that they have, what privilege they have and expectation they have of privacy based on the information that we have today. Sometimes clients
mhm.
still aren't going to believe you, and sometimes it's almost you're going to feel like a car salesman where you're sort of talking them into letting them know what their privacy expectations are. You have to be very gentle with them and very patient, and realize that the questions that they're asking aren't to be annoying or to be difficult. It's for them. It could be the difference between being
Yeah,
here and not. Sometimes life or death.
yeah, yeah. I have so much respect for what you do. You conduct professional assessments. Can you tell us about those assessments and what your role is as a professional? You are a counselor and an immigration specialist. So tell us what you do with the assessments and what do counselors need to know about the various assessments? There's so many different types.
Sure. Yeah. So, as a professional counselor, you have the ability to provide what's called immigration mental health evaluations. There's a few of them. I'll go over them very briefly. The first one's called the hardship waiver. So, for example, if I had a partner and that partner was undocumented and they came to the United States, they could file for a hardship waiver if we're married. Basically, what the evaluation is focused on is how I would suffer as a U.S. citizen in the event my partner were forced to leave the United States. Right? There's also an evaluation called VAWA, which is Violence Against Women Act, even though any gender can use it. And that is if you're in the United States, you're married to a U.S. citizen, and they abuse you during the marriage, suffer intimate partner violence, you can seek immigration relief. VAWA also kind of has a modification in the sense that if I happen to be a 60-year-old person from the Dominican Republic and my child is here, they're like 30 years old and they're abusing me, I can file for VAWA based on that violence as well, right? The violence needs to have been from a person who's a qualifying citizen in that instance. We also have an asylum claim. Asylum claims can be anything from religious persecution. It could be from someone who's running from FGM, which is female genital mutilation of their country of origin.
Mm,
Um, we also may have a U visa, which is someone that's a victim of a qualifying crime while in the United States. Maybe you're working
Okay.
at a gas station, closing up, some person comes to you, robs you with a gun, steals your money, traumatizes you. You may be eligible for U visa relief. You have to cooperate with the police. So we see sometimes people aren't really happy about
Mm,
doing that. And then there's also
mm,
called a T visa, which is someone was brought to the United States for trafficking. Maybe somebody, maybe you're living in Russia, someone sees you, they say, "Oh, come over, I want you to do modeling." You end up coming over to the US, and basically what they have you doing is working in a hotel for like $3 an hour doing housekeeping, maybe doing
mm,
forced, could be sex work, whatever it is, and doing an
mm,
evaluation on how that trafficking has impacted
hmm.
that person. Also requires you to speak with the police. Um,
Okay.
the reason why
You
I'm sort of
basically that's if you're brought here against your will. So
well,
this is the trafficking.
you can be coerced into getting here. You can be tricked. Right?
Ah,
They
okay.
may say, Dr. Collins, you've got a great job for you working in X and X university. You end up getting here, and we make you work at some sort of hotel. And we say, well, if you end up leaving, you're going to owe us X amount of dollars for your trip. And if you don't pay it, your family at home is going to have to pay it somehow. Really sort of blocks you in.
Hmm. So all of those represent situations where special consideration can be granted, but the assessment has to be conducted by a mental health provider.
Some of those, and usually this happens when the considerations or the harm that someone has faced is physical, but there's also a psychological component to it. And we need to be able
Mm.
to articulate that, and then with our testing, be able to quantify it and then put it all together.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that uh, it has to be done by a qualified mental health professional. What do people who are mental health professionals need to do to be qualified?
So you need to be licensed, and there really isn't a specific qualification that USCIS immigration is asking for in order to do
Okay.
the evaluation. But you want to make sure you have testing. I mean, you want to make sure you have training, and there are a variety of different trainings online. There's a variety of different books as well. I just recently did a talk about this with NBCC last week. That I guess you could, if you signed up for it, it was the virtual symposium where we went into depth about these different evaluations and some of the considerations counselors need to have.
Okay. Do counselors need to be concerned about risk to them when they do these evaluations? Or is there anything that can just, and I'm sure there are people who are maybe watching who are saying, oh, is that safe for me to do that?
I would hope not, but I can't guarantee it for sure. I think what we're seeing is that we're kind of living in a time where the government is willing to weaponize the judicial system against private citizens, sometimes even against local citizens as well. I'd love to be able to say, do these evaluations, you're going to be completely safe. I've never had anything happen to me. I've done a bunch of them, but also this is a sort of a renewed administration that I think maybe looking to do some new tricks to dissuade people from getting access to due process instead of resources.
Mm-hmm. You do evaluations in several states, right? New York, where you are, and where else?
Texas, Florida, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Massachusetts.
Okay. So anyone in those states can look to you for these kinds of assessments to be provided, to be offered. Awesome. Awesome. I'm going to put your information at the end of the podcast. The closing screen will be your contact information for anyone that may want to reach out to you for a consultation. And I'm sure this is searchable, these kinds of resources, assessments, they're searchable for in various states, right? You could type in that you're wanting to
Mhm.
find out about immigration assessments for, say, the state of New Hampshire or something and find someone. Okay, great. Before we go, there's another piece that I think is important to talk about, and that is we who work in the mental health field, we are, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, we are part of the industrial mental health complex. And the industrial mental health complex, as we like to call it, similar to the industrial medical complex, is built upon and founded upon um, a lot of values and ideologies that don't fit or that don't serve immigrant populations or people of color in general well. Dr. Jennifer Mullen's book about decolonizing therapy talks about ways that we, as mental health professionals, buy into those ideologies unknowingly. We have been indoctrinated by systems in our graduate programs that are founded upon ideologies that are more Eurocentric and don't serve again, people of color well, but we don't even realize it. We're buying into perhaps beliefs or stereotypes and things. What can you say to counselors about preparing themselves to really have a multicultural mindset and to really challenge themselves to decolonize therapy so that they are serving immigrant populations and people of color in general in a more culturally sensitive, culturally responsive way? What are some things that stereotypes, even perhaps, that counselors just need to be aware of? Or what are some ways in which our system is does more harm potentially to immigrant populations than good?
I think a good starting point is thinking about the DSM-5 TR and looking at it as a resource that is extremely valuable and really useful, but also realizing that a lot of that data does come, it seems like from like kind of middle America and families
Mhm.
that seem to be kind of like in the middle of the socioeconomic means, and recognize that the DSM-5 criteria that's been developed for depression, for example, might look very different for a person that's just arrived from Senegal a few days ago. There may be some
Yes.
overlap. There also may be a lot of cultural nuance and beyond nuance that we have to take into consideration. I remember sort of working
Yes.
on with a family that was from a Central African country and consulting with a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist had an idea about this person's depressive state, and they end up calling in another therapist that happens to be from that same country and said, this is just kind of effectively how we are as people. It was a now I credit the psychiatrist from calling someone in and getting a second opinion, but had he not had that resource, or had he not had that cultural humility to do that, we could have labeled someone with a disorder that really wasn't a disorder, it's just sort of their way of being. Essentially, what we're when we do that, what we're saying is the way you are is pathological in our society and the way in which we have medicine. The only way to really get around that is to have a radical commitment to seeing people for who they are, being radically empathic, and taking
Yeah.
time to really appreciate how this person may be different than the way we are. Now, this doesn't mean the DSM is useless and we throw it to the trash. What we have to say is we have to look at it in consideration of who is this designed for and how might it help us with diagnostic information about someone, but also where it comes short. We also see this with testing as well, right? We see sometimes there are certain tests that yield different results depending on where that particular test is administered in which specific population. If we really want to be helpful and useful, we have to consider culture not as a context, but it's a building block of the person that we're seeing. We've got to really make a decision as clinicians is, are we willing to do that, not additional work, but that necessary work to see the whole person and then figure out where we can be from there.
All right, we need to say that again loud for the people in the back. It's not additional work, but it's necessary work. So we see people for who they are. Yes. And the ideologies that go along with, and I like the way you said, middle America, um, and really white middle America, to just lay it out there. And when you think about cultural nuances, and when you think about the uh, the traumatic experience that a person may have had before they even arrived in the United States, and
Mhm.
then to potentially face more trauma. And we talked about the word you used in last week's podcast was they're experiencing terror. Ooh, wow. Um, you can end up with compound complex PTSD and have that misdiagnosed as something different. I won't say more severe or less severe, but something different.
Mhm.
And if we're not aiming our work at the right target, we're not doing good work at all. The best treatment aimed at the wrong target because you've got the wrong diagnosis is no treatment at all. And that's important, I would say, for us to remember as providers. Would you agree?
100% agree.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to add to our discussion today on immigrant mental health? There's so much more that we could say, and especially in these times whenever so many immigrant populations are at risk of legal consequences and a lot of with the fallout and ramifications. What have we not said that you think is important for our listening audience or viewing audience to hear?
So last week, Dr. Collins, you gave me the last word, and I kind of give like a bleak, a bleak last comment. I'm going to try to be more optimistic here, which is I think there's an opportunity here as mental health clinicians, whether you're doing evaluations, whether you're serving clients with a week-to-week basis, or whether you're doing intake, whatever that looks like. There's an opportunity here to make a difference to support immigrant populations, right? Whether they are documented, undocumented, whatever that case might look like. It's going to require you to, again, adopt an approach of radical empathy and also really consider that this person is a whole entire being that has
Yes.
a cultural experience with them, right? And if they're relocating to the United States, it's difficult for us that live here. Imagine people who are sort of just coming new to this. So being
Mhm.
aware of that, infusing our empathy with acceptance of the person that we see in front of us and being willing to suspend judgment and bias that we may be that may be conditioned with.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you are doing. Thank you for taking time to talk to us last week and for this week's episode. The work that you do is phenomenal. I know that you are very busy, so I know this was a sacrifice of time, and I thank you for that. Thank you for being with us.
Doing anything for you, Dr. Collins. Thank you.
Oh, you're kind. You're kind. And to everyone who is watching or listening, this has been a two-part conversation with Dr. George James Ramos, licensed mental health counselor and the founder of New York City Mental Health Immigration Evaluations. So thank you. Thank you for tuning in. If you are a person who is in need of a consultation or services, I'm going to have Dr. Ramos' information on the credits at the end of today's podcast. If you are a provider, just keep providing, keep doing what you do, keep serving with empathy, cultural humility, and a multicultural mindset. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.